Hello. So we're also in the integumentary system. Up until this point, we've only talked about the skin, but remember that the integumentary system also includes the accessory organs, which would be this hair and the nails and the glands. So we're going to talk about the hair, and then we'll talk about sebaceous and the different types of sweat glands. For the hair is going to be grown in a modified epithelial lining, right? So here is the epithelium, which is the epidermis. And then you create this modified kind of sheet that kind of surrounds the root of the hair. So the area of the part of the hair that's kind of below the scalp, that will be the root. Okay, so this part right here. Surrounding it is the hair follicle. Again, that is the depression that surrounds it, and that's going to be derived from the epidermis. So it'll be an epithelial tissue surrounding that. And then at the very, very base of the root, you're going to have this fatter part right here, and that's going to be the hair bulb. The hair bulb is just that enlarged part at the end. And within the hair bulb, you have the hair papilla or papilla. So what did that mean again? Do you remember? Papilla? Papilla means mound, right? So it's just this mound right here. And within that mound, that's where you're going to have blood vessels that are going to feed and nourish the stem cells, which are located sitting kind of on top of that. That's called the matrix. We'll get to that in a sec. Okay. Oh, one other structure here. This right here is called the Erector Pili muscle, and the Erector Pili muscle that is going to be involved in raising the hair. Okay, so when we look at the hair itself, the hair has three layers. In the very, very inside, we have the medulla. So medulla is just a kind of broad term that just means the inside part, the deepest layer. Sometimes it's even absent from here, depending on the type of, the type of hair. So here is the medulla there, and then surrounding outside of that would be the cortex. So medulla in the middle, I remember it like middle, medulla, and then the cortex are on the outside. And then you have just a very, very thin scale-like covering protective layer around the outside. Now, when that's hair cells there, that's just created by cells that form, again, like scales. And so if we see the damage, you can see that the cells are kind of peeling off of one another. Okay, so you just have the medulla in the middle, the cortex, and then the cuticle on the outside. And then all of this structure here, this is actually showing you the follicle, which is not really part of the hair itself. It's the kind of depression that surrounds the hair. Okay, and so I do want to mention different types of hair textures because, we all lots of different types of textures out there. Some of us are wild and crazy, like my son right there. And really the degree of curl comes from the angle that the hair is in the follicle, right? So for straight hair, the follicle is sort of straight up and down. And the more tilted it becomes, the curlier the hair that comes out of it. Another thing that's different is the shape. The shape of the hair follicle is going to dictate the shape of the hair here. And you can see that the straighter hair is going to be more round, whereas again, the curlier and kinkier it becomes, the more flattened it becomes, right? So the angle of the follicle as well as the shape of the follicle will dictate the type of hair that comes out of it, which I find kind of fascinating. Okay, so the other thing that I want to talk about is, well, we're going to talk about growth, but before we talk about that, let's make sure that we know what this word means, hair matrix. So here is the hair papilla. Remember, papilla mound, that's where the blood vessels are going to be located. And again, they're going to nourish the stem cells. And the stem cells are located in a layer right on top of that that's called the hair matrix. Okay, so you have the papilla here and the hair matrix right on top of that, which includes those stem cells. And so when you're looking at how the hair grows kind of the same way that the skin grows, like from bottom up. Okay, so you have the stem cells located in the matrix right on top of the papilla in the bulb. And then as they do mitosis and add more and more cells, they're going to push the other cells kind of further up. And as the other cells are getting further and further up, they're going to become more and more keratinized. So they're going to fill themselves up with keratin. And so by the time that you get hair coming out of it, it's not, you know, your hair is not alive anymore. There's not cells there. You just have the dead cells that are filled with keratin, right? So your hair is mostly just keratin protein. And again, it kind of grows from the bottom upwards. Okay, for the Erector Pili muscle, the way I remember it is the Erector with an A, though be careful. With the Erector Pili muscle, it erects the hair. So if you're scared or you're cold, your hair is going to stand up. And the way that it stands up is this little muscle right here, and it contracts and it's going to pull on the bottom of the follicle and just sort of erect it up. Okay, so again, the Erector Pili muscle erects the hair. Just remember that Erector Pili muscle spelled with an A and erect is an E. Okay, so other than that, though, it's a pretty a nice name to tell exactly what it does. On to some glands. We're going to talk about 3 different kinds of glands. And the first is a sebaceous gland. Ooh, where did I put this? A sebaceous gland. And sebaceous glands secrete a product that's called sebum. So these are endocrine glands. Remember that endocrine glands are derived from epithelial tissues, and so when you look at them, they're going to be made up of they kind of look a little bit like epithelial tissues. And this one, they have ducts, and this duct is going to lead into a hair follicle. So the best way to identify a sebaceous gland is that they are always connected to a hair follicle. So if you're looking at this picture here, see these structures that look a little bit like a bunches of grapes? Those are the sebaceous glands, and this right here would be a hair follicle. And so it's got a duct that's going to lead into the hair follicle. So what sebum is a type of oil. It's an oily product, and it's used to moisturize it. And so the sebum is going to coat the hair root with oil, and that's going to help moisturize the hair, and that'll help keep those cuticles nice and tight, nice and healthy. Okay, so it's a sebaceous gland that secretes sebum, always going to be associated with a hair follicle, and that's going to be how you can recognize it. I think I might have said endocrine gland before. That was a misspoke. I misspoke. I meant to say exocrine gland because it's on the external. It secretes onto the external product. Okay, so here we have sebaceous gland and sebum. Now for acne, what acne can happen is because the sebaceous gland has the oil in it, and oil is kind of yummy for bacteria. They like to eat that stuff. So sometimes especially if you need to exfoliate and you've got a little bit of a plug, if the hair follicle becomes clogged, you get that kind of trapped bacterial infestation, and that's what can lead to an infection. And again, it's the redness and the bumps and the swelling. That is your own body's response to the infection, not the infection itself. So it's not the bacteria really, it's how your body trying to get rid of the bacteria. And so that's going to lead to acne. And so a good tip to help with that is salicylic acid. And the reason that salicylic acid is really good because it helps prevent clogging the pores in the first place. Okay, so it's a little, like an exfoliation. Okay, now on to the sweat glands, and there are two different types of sweat glands, and they both secrete sweat, but they're different types of sweat. The first one we're going to talk about is an eccrine sweat gland. And the eccrine sweat glands are the typical sweat gland, which means that it secretes the sweat that's going to be used for temperature regulation. So when you think of sweat, this is what you're thinking of is the sweat that comes from an eccrine gland. Okay, so it's going to be watery, it'll have, salty, and it'll have, sometimes it's got urea in it, but it's mostly it's a really good thing for temperature regulation. Those are going to come from eccrine sweat glands. And eccrine sweat glands, remember, they're exocrine glands, which means they're going to have a duct, and they are also derived from epithelial glands. So you'll notice that they are lined with epithelial tissues. Okay, so when you look at this here, you can see that it's made up of those cuboidal tissues. Okay, so they kind of look like they're just coils. And so when you cut through the coil, you can see kind of the epithelial tissues lining, creating circles like that. Okay, the second type of sweat gland is called an apocrine gland, and apocrine glands are more specialized, and they're found primarily in your armpits, in your groin, and in your anus region, and they are inactive until puberty. And so what they do is they secrete a more oily substance, and this is why little kids can run all day, and they don't smell that much at the end. But if, once you hit puberty, it's like, whoa, take a shower. And that's because that oil in the sweat, again, bacteria love oil and bacteria are stinky. Okay, so that's what creates that body odor. It comes from these specialized apocrine glands. And the apocrine glands are also tied to emotional state, and they do secrete pheromones, which are chemical messengers that send out information about how you're feeling. And so that is why they talk about, if you're stressed out, you can get smelly. It's just because your apocrine glands will be more active when you have, an emotional day, right? Okay, so remember, eccrine, normal, typical sweat. Apocrine, those are going to be the specialized modified ones that are, for body, that create body odor because of that kind of oily substance. Okay, so let's look at what the hair would look like in the microscope real quick. Okay, so I would like you to go ahead and think about pausing the video, see if you can identify all the structures, and then we'll go through it all together. Okay, look back. Okay, so when we look at it in this picture, this would be the hair. Okay, so above the scalp would be the shaft. Below the scalp, the area that's going to be encased and connected to the hair follicle, that will be the root. At the base of the root, you'll have a bulb. Okay, so just the fat part at the end is the hair bulb. Sometimes you would be able to see the hair papilla, but you could not see it particularly well in this picture here. And then the depression, so the epithelial depression that surrounds the hair root, that would be the hair follicle. Connected to the hair follicles, you have the sebaceous glands. Remember, I think they look a little bit like clusters of grapes. And again, they're going to empty their product, which is sebum, into the hair follicle right there. So there's the sebaceous gland. These structures here that look like a bunch of little circles, kind of like together, those will be the eccrine glands, which are the sweat glands too. There is one more that I'd like to point I didn't put on here because it's a little hard. This right here is actually an Erector Pili muscle. It's connected to the hair follicle that would be right here. Okay, and remember the Erector Pili muscles erect the hair. Okay, that's all for now. See you later.